I'm here with Johnny Ward, probably the first person, maybe the only person on this podcast with their own Wikipedia page for reasons that we'll get into in quite a lot of detail. Johnny, how are you doing today?
Good, thanks, mate. I just got back from a run, so I'm a bit hot and sweaty.
Well, I mean that's yeah, we ask our guests to do a run before they come on, so that's quite normal. So we're gonna get into your absolutely fascinating life, your life of travel, your life of adventure, and there's some TEFL thrown in there as well for good measure. So take me right back to the start then. What was life like before you decided to kind of launch on this journey that's really taking you through the rest of your life thus far?
Yeah, well, long story short, I'm from Ireland. Obviously, you can probably hear it from my accent. And I was born in the south of Ireland and had a kind of tricky situation with my dad. He's in prison and da da da. And long story short, then, as I say, my mum, my sister, and I moved up north. And we grew up in Northern Ireland then. We were on welfare for 10 plus years, blah, blah, blah. Everyone's got a sob story. Mine's no different. And I always wanted to be free. So then I went to university in England, 18 years old, left Ireland at 18 and did 4 years at uni in England. And then finally I was free to make a decision what I wanted to do with my life and the lifestyle that I would hopefully choose to adopt. Um,
Mhm.
but I didn't have any money still. So that's how English teaching kind of changed my life. Actually, I did a TEFL course and I ended up in Thailand, and then that gave birth to the last 15, 16 years of my life, which we're probably going to cover in the next few questions.
Yeah. So you talk about, you use TEFL as sort of a launching pad, and we will cover that a little bit more. But what were your kind of goals? Did you ever have goals to see all the rest of the world, to visit all these countries? Were you always of that mindset, or was it just a case of, well, I'm going to see what the next thing is, and then kind of go from there?
It's more of a personality thing, you, and to be honest, like I always did
Mhm.
quite well at school. I was always straight A's, getting straight A's, but also I was always getting in trouble, getting kicked out of class and all this. So
Mhm.
I always had like, I'm not good at taking instructions, not good with authority, but I was always quite good academically. So a lot of my friends and now my teachers, now I'm friends with them again 20 years later, would have said that they expected me to either end up in trouble or end up doing something cool. And my mom loves to tell everyone that she thought I'd either be a millionaire or in prison. So it was always on the cards that I was going to do something a bit different. So it wasn't a case of wanting to visit every country in the world, but I wanted to be free. I wanted to be financially free. Having grown up poor, I really
Mhm.
wanted to be financially free, but not at the expense of selling my youth and not at the expense of selling my 40, 50, 60 hours a week. So I wanted time freedom and financial freedom. And I know a lot of people can sit at home and think like, yeah, we all want that. But I literally dedicated my whole life to make sure those two things were true. And it wasn't so much, as I say, a case of like, I want to visit every country in the world. It's I want to be free to make the decisions that I want to do. If I want to climb mountains or run across countries or make a lot of money or build houses overseas or whatever it is, I want to be able to not have to ask permission, not have to deal with bank managers, not have to deal with bosses. And I feel like if you were to ask anyone from my background, they probably could have seen me in a situation like at least aspiring towards that. And thankfully that happened.
Mhm. Absolutely. And to go back to, you made that decision to get a TEFL certificate to teach English, and as you say, it was a bit of a launch pad for the rest of what came next. Can you tell us what it
Completely.
was like kind of finding work initially? And did you ever imagine yourself kind of settling down and teaching in Asia long term? Like, what was that move like for you?
Yeah. Honestly, you, and this is why, like, I get asked to do a lot of podcasts, and normally I say no
Mm-hmm.
because I'm really busy, right? But
Mm-hmm.
this whole TEFL stuff, like, it was, apart from starting my blog, doing a TEFL was literally the best decision I ever made in my life. You guys aren't paying me to be here or anything. That's the
I
genuine
can
truth. It was
attest to that.
yeah, that's why I wanted to do it because I'm a huge, huge advocate of TEFL. I'm a huge advocate of people teaching English, especially in Asia, but globally. It literally changed my life. And I think coming from a background like mine, like working class and no father and no money and da da da, it's like an absolute surefire way to create an entirely new lifestyle for yourself and creating an adventurous life for yourself. And then who knows what it'll lead to. Of course, you can have a good career in TEFL. I didn't end up doing that, of course, but I know a lot of people who, like I live in the north of Thailand here in Chiang Mai, where I'm doing the call from, and there's a lot of online work, people who work online here, and I'd say half of them started with TEFL. That's why I was so quick to say yes to you when you were asking me to do this, because
Mhm.
honestly, I think it's the best choice, apart from starting my blog, that I ever made in my life. So I just wanted to really testify towards that. What was the question?
So when you made that move to teach English in Asia with your TEFL certificate, obviously kind of the rest of your life would make the rest of your life sort of dictates the answer to this will be no. But when you kind of got that first job and you had sort of
Ah,
steady
yes,
you
yes,
had
yes,
sort of
yes,
steady income, did you kind of imagine yourself like, okay, maybe I'll stay doing this for a few
yes.
years?
I did, mate. I did. So I was broke my whole life, like when I was a child with my mom, right? And then obviously I
Hmm.
went to uni and I was broke, and but life was good. Don't get me wrong, it was fun. And then I
Hmm.
went to Thailand to teach English, and I was still broke. But life was even better. I was in Thailand. I was only working 20 hours a week. I was making new friends, cool parties, lovely food, lovely weather. Still broke, but loving life.
Hmm.
Um, and I was working at a language school, and like as you get to know, I'm sure you know a lot more than I do, you. But for people listening, as you get to know more about the industry, you realize there's like a whole hierarchy of what it means, what TEFL means, from entry level jobs like me at 22 or 23 that I was then, making $600-700 a month, to people
Hmm.
designing syllabi for schools making 5, 6, 10 grand a month in the Gulf states, for example. So the whole
Hmm.
scope was available, and I was aware of that after my first year in Thailand. And this was before I knew about blogging or anything, and I absolutely had planned to work and then then hit the road, travel a bit, run out of money, back to teach again, and slowly make my way up
Hmm.
through the TEFL hierarchy. And actually, 4 years after I taught English in both Thailand and in Korea, and I ended up actually moving to Malaysia to do a master's in management with the focus on education, because I wanted to come back to Thailand and do
Right.
more TEFL ESL stuff, because I realized, like, although I was working in a language school, which was essentially part time, which was brilliant for the record. I was broke, but had loads of free time to study Thai, to travel around Thailand. So that was great. But as you get older, you wanted something with a bit more stability. And I was aware that there were jobs available where people were making 5 times what I was making. And my life was already good in Thailand without much
Hmm.
money. So I was thinking, God, imagine having a better job making 4 or 5 times this. Like, that's the dream. So that was completely my plan, actually, before things changed.
Hmm. That is both a great anecdote and kind of a relief because part of me was going like, "Oh no, he's going to say, oh, TEFL was just a footnote in this journey." No, that's
No,
great.
no, no.
I'm very very glad to hear that. So, talk to me about when you started your blog as well, because not only does it have a lot in common with other guests we've had who combine sort of travel writing and experiences with TEFL, but your blog became wildly successful. So when did you set up your blog? For those who don't know, and can you tell us about the initial kind of goals that you had for it?
I can, mate, but like just before I do that, as I say, like
Mm,
I started English teaching back 10, 15 years ago. It was my first step to this new lifestyle, and that was in Chiang
mm,
Mai in Thailand. I fell in love with Chiang Mai. And then for anyone who follows me or anyone who Googles me after this, like I've made a few million from my blog now, and I've ended up coming back to Chiang Mai. So like here I am back in the same place that it all started, and now
mm,
I'm hanging out with still 3, 4, 5 guys who I met 15 years ago teaching English here, who have built good careers for themselves. I had lunch with
mm,
a guy, an English guy yesterday called Max, who's still here teaching English, and he's designing syllabus for
mm,
International House. So it completely shows you that people can create a life from it. But then I taught English 2007, 2008, 2009 in Korea, and then I ended up getting like a real job, not an English language school job, because my TEFL job was, like, as I say, only 20 hours a week, so it was essentially part time. And being broke was getting a bit old, and I ended up moving to Australia, like half of Ireland, on a working holiday visa, and that was cool as well.
mm,
Very different situation to living in Thailand teaching. So suddenly I was in Australia, which is obviously like very affluent, and I was working in a sales job, like cold calling, brutal job, but making 10K a month or whatever, like really cashing in, but no free
mm,
time and grinding it out on the phone. And I was dreaming of the days when I was broke in Thailand, living, loving life, instead of like
mm,
making loads of money in Australia but being depressed. And actually, all's well ends well, my time in Australia then, because I hated that corporate world so much, and I was making good money. So that was a huge epiphany for me. A lot of people think that, like, oh, I'll grind it out in the corporate world, I'll grind it out, and eventually I'll get enough money that it'll be worth it. I was instantly getting paid quite well because it was a sales job, commission based, and I was good at it. So I was
mm,
making like six figures at 25, 26 years old, or whatever I was, and I still hated it. So that was a huge blessing for me, because I realized that the money was never going to be enough to compensate for how like awful that mentality of grinding out in the corporate world was. Anyway, I see that like it's a very positive experience, because it was during
mm,
that time I started my blog. That was 2010. And the company in Australia, they sponsored me. For anyone who knows how that works, like they gave me basically a passport stamp to permanently live in Australia and ultimately become an Australian citizen. They paid all the money for that because I was good at
Wow.
the job. And I was just hated it so much. Like 3 months after they did that, I started my blog and quit the company and flew one way to Zimbabwe. But my buddy who I sat beside, who's even better at sales than I was, is now CEO of that company. And I've
Oh,
got a charity. Like since I finished doing all my countries and like my blog became a little bit famous, I have a charity where we build like kindergartens and playgrounds and all this for developing communities, often in Thailand. And my mate, like one of my best mates, who's now CEO of that company, we work with him every year and we do a big charity project. So it's cool how things come full circle.
it shows you there's something to be gleaned from every experience, even if it's a negative one. I mean, that's like,
Yeah.
you talk about how much you dislike that job, and now, that same company. That's amazing.
Yeah, it's
And
nice.
yeah, it's a little bit sort of kismet, isn't it? So,
Yeah.
now, and we're going to get into more detail about this, obviously, but you're the first person to have visited every country in the world and the North and South Pole, and we've got so many questions about this. But um, did you ever think that was possible or realistic? Like when you started?
That's not right. Sorry, that's
Oh,
not right.
sorry,
It's,
I
a few
apologize.
people have done every country, North and South Pole, but no one has
Hmm.
done every country, North Pole, South Pole, and 7 summits.
That's it. Okay, I apologize. Can I ask the question again? Is that okay?
No, it's fine. Just upload it like this. Who cares?
Oh well, fine. My apologies, but did you? I mean, obviously, when did it sort of dawn on you that this was a thing that was possible to you? I mean, did you ever think that like, yeah, I could do that realistically, or was it a case of I'm just going to have a go at this and see what happens?
Well, I finished my journey to every country in 2017, so 6.5 years ago.
Hmm.
I was only 33. And I knew that when you do something yourself, it doesn't feel as impressive, right? Because you watch it externally, like maybe you think like, oh my God, he's visited every country. I used to think that about people. And then when you do it yourself and you know that you're normal, it doesn't feel as impressive and you realize that anyone can do it, right?
Hmm.
So that's what it felt a bit like for me. But then trying like I tried to contextualize it, and when I did it at 33, I was the second or third youngest person to ever have done it, and then also I found out I was the only person from Ireland who'd ever done it, and then it did make me
Hmm.
think, oh, actually, this isn't so common, right? It's not so common. Um, but because it was such a big journey, like 11 years, that took me of full time travel. Basically, I ended up in a big lull after it. I was I was based in Bangkok at the time, although I was never there because I was doing the every country thing. But I
Hmm.
would fly back to Thailand, get visas and stuff, and continue. And once I'd finished, I came back from Norway, which was my last country, and like I didn't know what to do with my life. I'd started to make good money, so I wasn't really financially under pressure. I had a lot of free time because blogging, especially once you've hit critical mass, doesn't you don't need to be working 60-hour weeks. And I was like, God, what am I going to do? And it was a real crossroads in my life. I ended up drinking too much. I got fat for the first time in my life. I was like staying up late, waking up late, playing PlayStation all the time. Like it wasn't a healthy mindset at all. And
Hmm.
then I started running ultra marathons and climbing mountains. And like same as with the travel for me. Like if you're going to do something, do it properly. Um, I hate people sitting back like in their mum's basement complaining about life, and I didn't want to become that. So if you're going to travel every country in the world. You're going to run a marathon, run the hardest ultra you can find. You're going to climb a mountain, climb Everest. And then I
Hmm.
realized when I did a bit of research that no one had ever done the Explorers Grand Slam, which is every country. Explorers Grand Slam, which is North, South Pole, and the 7 summits, and every country. And you know that what do you call that? A Venn diagram when you have like circles that overlap.
Yeah.
I drew it on Canva. Like every country in the world, like 5, 6, 700 people have done that.
Mhm.
Explorers Grand Slam, 200 people have done that. Overlap, like no one's done them both. Okay, I'll do it.
Something I have to ask because, and it maybe sounds like a really, really obvious question to you, and you've probably been asked it much before, but when you do the Grand Explorer Slam, you do the Seven Peaks, you do North and South Pole, you do every country. You kind of touched on it there before, and what it felt like to actually kind of get it done. But what happens? Like, do the Guinness Book of Records people get in touch with you? Like, how does that kind of work? Like, what happens at that point?
you know, when I just turned 40, you and like something that's very nice about getting older, I find, especially with a guy, as a guy, is like of course I've still got a huge ego. Like climbing mountains and running ultras is all about ego, but my ego is a lot smaller than it used to be. So when
Mm,
I was like, let's say 30, and I knew I was approaching finishing every country, I contacted Guinness and I was like, what do I do about this? And da 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 da. And they ask for so much admin, especially with every country, because they need proof of every country. And I was like,
Mhm.
God, do I want to do this? Do I want to search through, what do you call that, meta tags or meta information of every photograph I've taken for 200 countries or whatever? God, this is a lot of work,
Mhm.
and maybe I will, maybe I won't. And I did like a half-assed attempt at it at 30, and it got rejected because like, oh, we need proof to make sure that you're in the north of the border in Democratic Republic of Congo. Oh God, bollocks to this. I'm not doing this. So then now at 40, I'm like, I absolutely don't care. I know I've done
Mhm.
it. Everyone who's followed me for years has seen it in real time.
Mhm.
So I don't care. I haven't applied for it. I won't apply for it. And I'm happy to, I'm proud of what I've done myself.
Mhm. Cool. We'll maybe not send a pint of Guinness in the post then. But
Oh, no, you
you've
can do that.
fair enough. Uh, Now you're probably the only person. I don't want to, cast aspersions on any former or future podcast guests, but you're probably the only one we've had that's claimed Mount Everest. So I have to ask about that. Um, and there are so many questions I could ask, but most of all, kind of what kind of preparation is involved for an expedition like that, and what does it feel like to finally make the summit? Is it a feeling you can describe with words, or is it just like a feeling that only people who've climbed it will know?
It's a very difficult question, Eunice. And also, like you coming from the UK, Scotland, UK,
Hmm.
like I, for Americans, it's slightly different. But if you come from the UK or Ireland, it's basically super posh people who climb Everest who sound
Mm.
like the king or the queen, right? Like that's how we are exposed to Everest as we grow up and watch TVs and documentaries and all that. So
Yeah.
those kind of people don't have to worry about the financial cost of expeditions, and the financial cost is so heavy. I'm very open about my finances when I was broke, and now I'm not so broke, so I don't mind talking about how much it cost. But it's like 77,000 euro, which is like 65, 70 grand or whatever sterling. So for me, that's
Yeah.
so much money. For almost anyone, that's so much money. But all these posh guys that you grow up watching on TV, they don't have to care about it. So they can come to Everest, risk death, get a bit scared, walk away, come back the following year with a bit more knowledge, try again, walk away. Third year, they can crack it. For me, because of the cost of it, it was one shot or done. So I feel like people are in my situation, and there are some, although not so many. There's a lot of posh people on the mountain. Um, it's a whole nother level of pressure. You're under pressure already because all your friends and family know you're doing it, and you don't want to fail. And obviously, you've got your own dreams, but knowing that because of the finances, it's one shot at it, which adds a whole nother level of pressure. And then that means, of course, if you're fortunate enough to survive and succeed,
Hmm.
then it's more relief than euphoria, or at least it was for me. Although, having said that, I did make a video at the top of Everest. You can see it on my Instagram. Like, I wasn't expecting, because I've done a lot of cool stuff, and a lot of big stuff and a lot of physical challenges, like firsts in the world and all this. And normally I'm proud, but on to the next one. But when I was in the summit of Everest, like I had this like a massive emotional outpouring I completely wasn't expecting. I've never had it before, and I'll probably never have it since. I think both the financial pressure, the pride of where you've come from to being on the summit of the world, the like facing death, and hopefully being through that. Although coming down, a lot of people die too. I was well aware of that. So it's just
Hmm.
relief. But then soon after that outpouring, like you're still at the summit, it's minus 40, minus 50 degrees or whatever. And there's like, you've heard about what, 18 people died that season that I did it just 6, 7 months ago. And it's a long way down. So I like instantly, you're like, you gotta take some of the energy gels, take some fluids and be like, right, game face for another, it takes 3, 4, 5 days to get down. So, and then I just dreamed of being in like there's a cool Irish bar in Kathmandu. I just wanted to be in there drunk for 3 days, but I was just so wrecked. It took me like 4 months to recover. Really, it did.
Yeah. I mean, I can imagine that. Well, no, I can't imagine the sheer physical toll it takes on you. And
It's
on a
hard,
similar,
mate. It's very, very hard.
yeah. See, I did think that. I did think it would be kind of difficult. And talking of, kind of treacherous expeditions, you've been to both the North and South Poles. Something I have to ask about that, and I don't want to sound like I'm obsessed with admin, but like, how do you even go about like arranging things like that? Who do you speak to be like, so yeah, I
uh,
want to go to the South Pole. Like, that's not a Ryanair flight. Like, how does that get done?
it there, there's logistics. There's normally third party, often military style logistics already exist for scientists and military stuff. Like in the North Pole, there's a base called Barneo that the Russians set up every winter or
Hmm.
every summer. I'm not sure which it is. No, every winter I think. And they set up this like they fly in on like the special plane and it drops like a digger, like a articulated digger thing. It's hectic, mate. And then
Mm.
that clears a runway. It's just two guys in a tent and a digger, and they get dropped on the ice, and then they dig a runway out with that digger over like 2 or 3 days, and then that allows a slightly bigger airplane to land, and then that slightly bigger airplane has got a bigger tent, and then you can go in and stay in those bigger tents, and then and then there's an Irish guy who runs. Actually, he's just sold the company, but you
Mm.
can run a marathon at the North Pole, and that's what I did. And they outsourced to that Russian operator. So I could pay the Irish guy who pays the Russians, and that's how I got in, and then ran a North Pole marathon.
So, well, okay. So, a couple of things kind of arise from that. So, how do you prepare? How do you do a marathon in such cold weather? I mean, that's got to be. I mean, do you kind of throw away everything that you've learned about like energy and about rest from doing it somewhere with clement weather, or?
Uh, wow. This was 2018, so I just finished my countries. I just
Mhm.
snapped out of my 5 6 month depression of like finishing it and being a bit lost in life, and had this like epiphany to start doing like hardcore stuff. So I'd
Mhm.
never run a marathon before, and I was living in Thailand, and it's like 40 degrees. And then my charity had just started taking off because I had a lot of followers from on my blog from finishing the country, and a lot of media featured me. So I had a lot of people reading my blog. So I started this
Mhm.
charity, and we were building a school in Delhi. So I was in Delhi for like 3 weeks before. It was like plus 45 degrees, and I flew straight from Delhi with my mate's borrowed ski clothes because I'd never run a marathon. I didn't know anything about what I was supposed to wear or anything. And I'd obviously had never been to like the Arctic or anything in North Pole. So I was using my mate's ski gear that I brought to Delhi with me. And then I flew from Delhi to Svalbard, which is like an island way up near the North Pole, and
Mhm.
landed there. And then I had a briefing there. And then we took this like military plane to the North Pole. And then I just got dumped on the side with all these like expert athletes. So then
Yeah.
we were in this tent freezing, and I was like, God, I don't know what I'm going to do here. And they hit this buzzer saying like the marathon's in 2 hours. It's quite serious. It's quite serious business because if you got the wrong gear or you're outside, you could freeze to death very quickly, right? And frostbite and all this. And then everyone takes off all their like ski gear and puts on all this specialist outdoor running gear. And they're like, Johnny, put your gear on. And I'm like, this is my gear. What
Oh
do you
no,
mean? This is all I have. So I had to run in that. But now I
that
know a
is.
bit. So like 2 weeks ago, I just did another marathon like near the South Pole. But now I'm a bit more experienced. I was a bit more prepared.
Oh God, I can't imagine people's faces as they look at you and go like, "Oh, well, he hasn't got all this stuff." Okay, um, that is
Well, they said to
absolutely
me like
wild.
they were very like when ultra marathons and stuff. People are very nice, and once they saw like I was like a lost puppy, they were like, what energy gels do you normally use when you run marathons? I was like, I've never run a marathon before. I'm like, oh, they're like, take this, take this, take this. And I was like, oh, okay, thanks, thanks.
Oh goodness me, that is absolutely wild. And talking of kind of the more sort of unusual experiences you've had, because I mean, it's not every day that you run your first marathon ever, and it's at the North Pole. But just from reading your blog, and obviously when you do something, you visit every country. There are certain countries that are going to come up in terms of like how on earth did you manage to get into there? Because some countries, whether it's political or whether it's religious or whether it's a range of things, there's all sorts of difficulties that can come up. So, talk to me about your experiences of getting access to like Turkmenistan and North Korea. How difficult was that? And did you ever feel like your goal to visit every country, when you're in the depths of that and achieving that, did you ever feel it was kind of in jeopardy because of, I mean, well, North Korea and Turkmenistan, countries like that?
Like at the risk of sounding like an American self-help guru, like once I've made a decision to do something, 100% it's going to happen. Like
Hmm.
I'd never had any doubt that I'm going to do it. Like because I'm happy to break laws and smuggle myself into countries and risk death and all this. That's why people were worried when I was on Everest because I was going to like succeed or die. It's how you got to live your life if you want to achieve big things. I really believe that. Anyway, so was it
Hmm.
ever in jeopardy? Like I mean, it felt in jeopardy. North Korea is easy, just for the record. I know a lot of people ask me about that. It's very easy. You go through one of their government fixers, and they outsource to two companies, Koryo and Young Pioneers. And I know the owner of Young Pioneers. That's that wild company that guy died in North Korea. He's a bit mental, the guy, but he's a fun guy. I use them. They're quite a boozy way to visit North Korea. Um, so it's easy anyway, very easy. You don't have to apply for a visa or anything. They take care of it all. But Turkmenistan is tough. I tried and failed 3 or 4 times to
Hmm.
get in there, and then I met a guy who helps with permits, and he gets me in. And now I run trips there. Actually, I'm setting up a 300k yearly cycle there. 2025 will be the first year we launched that. It's in the process at the moment. It's a very cool country. But it's, I guess, a country that could jeopardize it. Because I know there's a Croatian guy who's trying to become the first Croatian to visit every country in the world, and he can't get into Turkmenistan. So I guess it's in jeopardy. But eventually he'll get in, and he's a bit more clean cut. So he wants to get the visas, where I would just be flying to Iran and walking across the border if it was my last country. But Yemen, I had a big issue with. It was like in the depths of civil war when I went in 2017, and I ended up on a cargo ship for a few days to get in there. I ended up in this like Indian cement boat for 4 days across the Somalian Sea to get to Yemen, because I tried and failed 6 times, and it was my second last country. And so I say, what am I going to do? Go home for a year, or I'm going to make it happen? So I ended up moving to this town in Oman called Salalah for a month, and paid for a month's rent, and said, like, I'm not leaving Oman. It borders Yemen, obviously, and I'm not leaving Oman until I get into Yemen. And I met a guy who helped me bribe officials and stuff, and ended up in this cargo ship that took me into Yemen. But I always figured I would eventually get there, and I did. And then for Saudi, until MBS was in power, there was no such thing as a tourist visa. So a friend of a friend ended up like officially hiring me, and I got in on a business visa. And similar situations in Pakistan and Angola. I mean, if there's a will, there's a way. It's if you want to do cool, like something cool with your life, these kind of setbacks, you can't sit at home and cry about it. You have to work out a way to do it, and there always is a way. So I managed it.
That's incredible. And I have to ask, like, when you are in these countries that have either they're dictatorships or they don't really have outside visitors, and that kind of, you had to smuggle yourself in. By the way, we could do a whole podcast about the cargo boat thing you just mentioned. But when you're there, what does it feel like? Because you must feel like heavily surveyed. You must feel as if people are kind of watching you. Or did you manage to get yourself into situations where you were kind of a bit more incognito? I mean, how did that kind of...
Wow, I'm a pasty white Irishman, so incognito is a tough sell.
Yeah. I mean,
North Korea, you literally have like government handlers with you, but you have to go through government agencies, so that's going to happen. But the rest of the time, like before my blog started making good money, I was doing it on a super tight budget. So I would just arrive by land, because I never flew for the first 5 or 6 years, at the land border, pay my bribe or whatever to get the visa, and then just end up in the capital city with nothing booked. And 9 times out of 10, people would be like, "What the hell is this guy doing?" And they would generally help you. And even in the sketchier countries, more often than not, it's the governments that are sketchy, isn't it? And the people are cool. That's not always the case. Like, there's a few countries in Central and West Africa that are pretty rough, in Papua New Guinea. But generally, people are looking out for you. You just got to make sure you don't arrive at night. Like, if I was going to any moderately dangerous or dangerous country and I was getting towards the border at nighttime, I would just hunker down in some crappy guest house and wait until the middle of the day, because the chances of stuff happening at night are infinitely higher. But bad things do happen. I've been robbed, and I've been in car crashes. I've been in hospital like loads of times. But you just got to take it in the chin. And then I guess there's 2 sides to visit in every country. Like, there's doing it how I feel I did it overland over 10 years, 2, 3, 4 weeks per country, really feeling like you're on an adventure. Like, that's what I wanted, the life I dreamed of, and I did. And then there's this new wave of like TikTok, every country travelers who fly in, fly out, fly in, fly out, capital city, Radisson Blu, fly in, fly out, Marriott, fly in, fly out. I'm like, okay, whatever, sure. I mean, technically that's every country, but I don't want that. I want the stories. I want the adventure. I want the chicken buses and the hospitals and the police stations.
I mean, I don't think those people would survive Everest is the main thing there I'm taking away from that. I know it's a big question, and it maybe sounds a little bit vague, but equally I have to ask it because I'm sure there's a story here. So, of all the places that you've traveled, which one surprised you the most, and why was that?
Which one surprised me the most? Oh, I've got a good answer. I've got 2 good answers for that, actually. And I'm kind of scared to say them because I don't want them to blow up. Like, anyway, if you're like 20 years old or 25 years old, Iceland is like a big hot spot for bucket list travel, right? But if you're 35, 40 plus, like I just turned 40, Iceland, when I was 20, wasn't a destination, right? And now it's every man and his dog with an Instagram account is there. And there's 2 places that are about to do that, and I'm about to contribute to it, sadly. The Faroe Islands I don't know if you know
Okay.
it. Yeah, well, you should view it. It's near Scotland, actually. It's
Yes.
just north of Scotland. It
Hmm.
belongs to Denmark and Svalbard, which is where I accidentally discovered because that's where I used as my jump off point for South Pole, North
Hmm.
Pole, which belongs to Norway. So there are two islands in the Arctic Circle, and or the Faroes aren't actually in the Arctic Circle, but up there, and they're both just spectacular, like ridiculously spectacular. They should be world famous destinations. I'd say those two plus the island of Socotra, which belongs to Yemen, which is what when I did that 4 days on a cement boat, I ended up
Hmm.
in. I think those three places, only because Socotra belongs to Yemen, so people are scared to go, even though the island itself is safe.
Hmm.
Maybe the most beautiful place in the world. Google image it; it's wild. And then Faroe Islands and Svalbard, although I do think Faroe Islands and Svalbard will blow up because they both belong to like Scandinavian countries. And I'd say the next 20 years they're going to be real tourist hotspots. But right now they're still quite obscure, amazing destinations. Polar bears in the wild and all this wild stuff. It's cool.
That's awesome. Yeah, I imagine in 15, 20 years' time we'll be listening back to this and sort of wondering if the Faroese travel board can maybe get in touch. But um,
Uh,
was there anywhere? I'm talking of kind of places that you weren't maybe as familiar with beforehand. Although obviously your knowledge of the world is incredible. But was there anywhere on your sort of travel itinerary that through the years you weren't as excited about going there, but you ended up kind of falling in love with them? I mean, obviously we've talked about a few different places there. Was
yeah.
there anywhere else where you thought like, oh, I don't know about here, but I have to go?
Yes.
And then yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's very easy for me to say this as a guy, so I understand the context here, but I am a guy, so it is what it is. But I've always loved traveling through the Middle East.
Hmm.
Or not even just the Middle East, the Arab world, so North Africa as well. Uh,
Hmm.
and when I was going from Cape Town to Casablanca by public transport one time over like a year or whatever, and I ended up in Mauritania, which is a country in West Africa, just south of Morocco, and that just felt like you leave Senegal,
Hmm.
which feels like West Africa, like music and parties and energy and chaos, and and then there's Mauritania, and then above it it's Morocco and Riyadh and tea and like nice roads, and in the middle of it it's Mauritania, which is a country most people couldn't put on a map, I think, and it is just not only is it beautiful, it's the real Sahara. I know people go to this. This is going to be like kind of offensive and confronting to people. You know, if you go to the Sahara in Morocco or Egypt, and you
Hmm.
feel like you're in the Sahara, but like they're selling you Chinese fridge magnets as you're there, and then you go to the Mauritanian Sahara is like the real Sahara, you know,
Hmm.
without the tourists, without the infrastructure, and it's just spectacular and beautiful. And the Mauritanian people, like, there's been no globalization there for better or worse, and it's just a wild experience, like a true African, like Arabic African Saharan experience to travel around Mauritania. And now that's a country I go back to all the time. I'm setting an ultra marathon up there. The first edition will be in this first week of December this year, 2024, because I love it. I go back 3, 4 times a year. It really
Hmm.
grasps me. I've got a very close friend there, like a Mauritanian guy, and we're running it together, and it's just beautiful. And then for people who follow me or people who don't, if you Google the iron ore train in Mauritania, you can hitch a ride on the longest train in the world. Which there's a big iron mine in the center of the Sahara,
Hmm.
and there's a 1 mile long train that digs it out every day and takes it to the coast, and you can go and get dropped off in the middle of the Sahara and then climb on top of that train and ride it through the night for like 15
Wow.
hours. Unreal. Yeah, cool.
Goodness me. And during your travels, you've I keep saying it obviously, sorry. During your travels, you've visited war zones, you've visited disputed territories, you've other places you could describe kindly as a bit unsettled. What kind of experiences have you had in those countries? Like even ones where you've sort of smuggled yourself in. I mean, you talked a little bit about the danger kind of beforehand, but were there ever experiences you had where you just thought, "Oh my God, what we're doing here"?
Yeah, in Mogadishu in Somalia, I had been like, there's a Somalia. Like if you're like a bit autistic and you love like obsessions with things like I do, like countries and
Hmm.
da da da. Yeah, and then you fixate on these things. So this might be boring to some people, but I'm obsessed with this stuff.
I am too.
Like Somalia, for example, is split into kind of three regions, two/three regions. There's Somalia that we know of with the blue flag with the star, the scary one, Mogadishu, and then actually north of that are two regions called Somaliland and Puntland. I'm not going to bore everyone with this, don't worry. Anyway, they are independent nations, but they're not recognized internationally. So when I was visiting every country in the world, you can go to the north of which should be a country, but it's called Somaliland, and it's safe, right? But it's kind of cheating because it's not Somalia really; it's its own nation. And then when I was coming towards the end of finishing my every country, I couldn't sleep at night because I knew I had cheated by not going to the real Somalia, the scary Somalia. So I organized a trip to go to Mogadishu, and I landed there, and it was like there's two compounds you can stay in. One of them was under attack by Al Shabaab when I arrived, and it's just like when I'm in the airport, and I was like, "What am I doing here?" Just to say that I'd been here, and then I was there for 3 or 4 days. We went to the Black Hawk Down place where the helicopter's still sitting on the ground, and the day I was going to leave, Al Shabaab then attacked the airport. We were stuck in the compound, and just like AK-47s shooting through the night, and I was like, "This is stupid. Like I shouldn't be here."
Yeah, maybe thinking about Radisson Blue at that stage. But I can, talking of, I mean, talking of disputes and of, kind of regions that maybe seem a bit unsafe from the outside, but clearly you're able to have an experience there. I have to ask about this amazing blog that you wrote. I mean, they're all really good. Anyone with any sort of inkling towards an interest in travel should be reading your blog. But there's a particularly good one I thought you wrote about taking your mum to Afghanistan for her birthday. Um, for those who haven't read that blog, and they should read that blog, how did that all go? Because that's an amazing story.
Oh, this was before the Taliban, so
Mm,
it's actually safer now for foreigners. But
mm,
I just organised a police escort to pick me up in Kabul. I was in Ireland visiting my mum as I was organising. So I was on loudspeaker because I was doing something. And my phone was on loudspeaker, and I was speaking to the security firm that had organised to pick me up.
mm-hmm,
And it's quite expensive. All these like when you have armed guards and all that's expensive. But I'd already paid for it because I'd paid for it for myself. And the guy on the phone, my mum's in the kitchen making me dinner. I was in the living room like working or whatever. And the guy's like, "Okay, Johnny, like now you've paid for that, we can use that security detail whether you come alone or whether you come with your friend or your wife or your mum or your dad." And my mum could hear it in the kitchen. She's like, "What did they say? What?" It's like it's free. It's free for me. It's free for me to come. I can come too. And I was like, "God, here we go." And then fast forward bloody 4 months, and I'm in Kabul with her.
mm-hmm.
I actually got really drunk in Istanbul the night before and ended up in Kandahar by mistake. But and then I missed my flight. I got off in the wrong. It was supposed to be a direct flight, but it stopped in Kandahar, and I just got to bed at 3 in the morning, and then I had to be at the airport like 5, whatever. I was like drunk, hungover, and when it stopped, I was like, "Oh shit, this must be Kabul." And then I got off the plane. It was Kandahar, and the plane took off. I'm just stuck there, and I'm meeting my mum in Kabul. I'm like, "God, she's
Yeah.
gonna land in Kabul without me." God, it's a stressful morning.
Oh my goodness me. And so how was the trip itself? Because again, it's a brilliant blog and it defies explanation. But there's a brilliant photo of your mum holding an AK, and it's just absolutely incredible. So like, how was that trip? Was it pretty peaceful, and you got to show your mum really cool sort of bits of Kabul, or?
Both those things.
Mm,
Oh, one of those things is true. It was not pretty peaceful, but I did get to show my mum some very cool places. Yeah,
mhm,
it was very dangerous then because, like, obviously, I think if you just read the snapshots of what the Taliban is or are, that's not representative of the reality there. Like, because some of the Taliban are absolute extremists, and if you believe in this, would go straight to hell. But then, because of the depth of the religion, huge swaths of the population support the Taliban. I know the
mhm,
US propaganda makes us feel like the Taliban have stolen Afghanistan. I hate the Taliban for the record.
mhm,
However, they're hugely supported in Afghanistan. Some people don't like them, of course, but many do. So
mhm,
it wasn't safe then because the Taliban were constantly pushing against the regime. Um, so it wasn't a great time to be there as a foreigner. And we were constantly like, anytime we would get, especially in Kabul, anytime we were out and about, they would hear murmurs on the radio and we'd be whisked out of there. But when you went
mhm,
outside Kabul into the countryside and stuff, it was lovely. I mean, it's just politics and religion messing everything up, isn't it? People are
mhm,
people, and then politics and religion gets involved. And also, it doesn't help that the strength of the US media. Everyone assumes when you're white that you're American, which isn't helpful either.
I can imagine in certain places, no, it's definitely not helpful. But well, actually, that leads quite nicely into the next question because we're going to talk about one of the sort of few communist outposts in remaining in Europe. I want to ask about Transnistria because for those
Good
who don't know
knowledge.
about, well, thank you. I have to say it's mostly down to football, but never mind. But for those who don't know about Transnistria, it's a sort of disputed territory. It's a little stretch of land that still is Marxist Leninist, and it has all this sort of old kind of Soviet architecture. But so for those who don't know, like what happens there, and what was it like to visit? Because it has to be up. I mean, I don't want to speak for you, but surely that's up in the sort of most unique places you've been. No,
Have you been?
never. I'd love to though.
You should go, mate. It's very cheap.
Hmm.
It's really cheap. It's the cheapest place in Europe. So, like going there for a week holiday, very cool. You fly to Moldova to Chisinau, and
Mhm.
from there it's quite easy to go. I think you have. Did I get a permit to go in? I can't remember if I got a permit in Chisinau and then I took a bus there, or did I just take a bus there and get the permit on the border? And then what do you call it? What do you call the capital of Transnistria? I'm googling it now.
Um, that's gonna do my head in.
I'll find it. Anyway, yes, it was very interesting. Tiraspol, yeah, Tiraspol.
Tiraspol.
So like when you're in Tiraspol, yeah, really fascinating place, like you say, because if you're obsessed with countries and all this kind of stuff, like the former Soviet architecture, I find it really interesting. Um, and they have a very big cognac factory there, and you can go on a tour. And
Right.
it's like Moldova is officially the cheapest country in Europe, and then obviously Transnistria is like a disputed territory within Moldova, so it's half the price of Moldova. So you can't spend your money, and people are just drinking a lot there, and they're very surprised to see foreigners. There's obviously only a handful every few weeks or months, but friendly enough. It's very safe. A country like that's very safe. Although now, obviously, with what's going on with Russia and Ukraine, it's probably less safe now. But
Yeah,
yeah,
I can
fascinating
imagine.
place. Quite easy to get into. Very, like I say, there's no danger. You might have the only danger in these kind of places, and I wouldn't even use the word danger, is that you might get a bit of a friendly shakedown by the police or the military, where they expect a couple of dollars to be on their way. But it's not an aggressive thing. It's like they want a cup of tea, they would call it, whatever, and it's easier just to pay the $2 than to deal with the issue. But yeah, I was there with one of my mates. Very cool place. I'd be very keen to go back, although perhaps not right now.
No, I can't imagine this the safest place in the world right now. But yeah, it's one of these places where. So just kind of quickly on that. I mean, is it there are places where you have if you have a certain passport and your stamp, it's kind of difficult to go back through other routes. Was Transnistria like that, or did you go back
No,
through
no,
Moldovan
no.
customs and everyone was fine? Right.
No, that was fine. The only ones, like again, for people, I don't know, like it's quite esoteric. I'm not sure this is going to appeal to the mainstream audience, but South Ossetia and Abkhazia have got those issues with Georgia and
Mm.
Russia, but Transnistria is fine.
Johnny, we've barely scratched the surface of what you've achieved over the last 20 or so years. And honestly, there's hours and hours worth of podcast material somewhere. And people should try and listen to more of your podcast. But let's kind of take it back to the start again. How much would you say that TEFL helped you in starting this remarkable journey? You touched on it a little bit earlier, but if we go into a
Yeah,
little more detail there.
I literally mean it was everything. It literally changed my life. If I hadn't done it, I would have ended up. I studied economics at university. I would have ended up in London working in finance. And
Hmm.
sure, I probably would have made some money, but I would have been working 60-hour weeks for 15 years, and for what? It completely changed my life. And then with that step to do my TEFL, and it opened up not only did it open up like tangible possibilities. Obviously, I took it with my blog, and I know many other people with different opportunities that they've been presented with, whether it's in Tokyo or Seoul or Bangkok. But also opens your mind to stuff too. Whether you want to stay in the TEFL world, which is a great career, and many of my friends have done that, or uh, all the various other things that it can lead to. It completely changed my life. I tell you, it was the second biggest and best decision I ever made. And even in my early years of blogging, when the money was starting to be good, but who knew if it was going to stay or go, I always felt like I had this huge safety net that I could always just go back to teaching English, which is like a great lifestyle anyway. And I
Mhm.
felt that was like a huge pressure release, knowing that my worst case scenario isn't back to Ireland and working in a factory. My worst case scenario is like moving to Tokyo and teaching like while I live in Japan. Like that's cool.
Hmm. It is cool, and the fact that you've been able to maintain a blog for this long as well, and the wild popularity it's had, that's also very cool. So, what's the we get lots of people who teach English, but they also keep travel blogs, and that's great, and they're successful. But from a writing perspective, because obviously we talked about you teaching English, and clearly you're someone who writes really well. What's the best writing advice you would give to someone who wants to keep a travel blog or a blog about their experiences abroad? Because not every travel blog is successful. There has to be some kind of secret sauce, if you like.
Well, first of all, thanks, Ewan, but I'm actually not a good writer, but thank you anyway. And I would say,
Well,
on that note, being a good writer is not what makes a successful travel blog. A lot
mhm.
of writers are lazy. A lot of people are lazy, Ewan. This is the
Okay.
reality. And the success of a blog or slash anything in your entire life is how hard you work and how smart you work and the ability to be a good writer. There's many. I'm average at best, and I'm one of the biggest travel bloggers out there, certainly with the financial rewards. And there's a million bloggers who are 10 times better writers than me who never did it, but they want to wake up at 10:30 and be a starving artist, whereas I get out and hustle, and that's the
Mhm.
difference.
Fair play. And you've shown that worldwide travel is possible. I do mean worldwide in the strictest sense, but you've shown that's possible no matter what your starting point is. What would you say is the key thing that you've learned from traveling? What's the number one takeaway that you've got from the experiences you've had?
Oh,
I know.
wow, wow. From traveling, I don't know, but like from the journey that I personally have been on the last 16 years or whatever it is that like if you truly commit to something, and that doesn't mean an inspirational quote shared on your Instagram and then back to bed. If you truly commit to something, I feel like anyone can do anything. It's not about the background that you're from, the level of wealth of your parents, the education level you had, or anything. It's if you really set your mind to it, I truly believe that anything's possible. And of course, like the concept of privilege exists, and people
Mhm.
have head starts, but sitting at home and moaning about that's not going to fix that. You can still come from behind.
Mhm. Absolutely, I love that. So, just to kind of wrap things up, Johnny, and it's such a shame that we have to, but just to kind of wrap things up a little bit, I just sort of wanted to ask what's next for you because you've literally been everywhere. So, what's the kind of what's blah, blah, blah. So, what's the next thing you're looking forward to doing?
I want to have kids, so
Mhm.
that. But from a adventure perspective, I really want to, or I don't want to. I'm in the process of setting up for yearly events that I know I'm a normal person who's done like pretty cool things, but
Mhm.
I still know I'm normal. Like I'm not an elite athlete, and I've done things that appear to be elite athlete stuff, like rowing across the Atlantic or cycling across a continent. Da, 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 da. But I'm not. I'm just normal. I'm just a normal person who decided to do it, and I really want to create like these 4 events each year that'll be repeated every year. But I want to encourage normal people to come and suffer through the events too. And then once they suffer through the agony of it and come out the other
Mhm.
side, they'll be like, "Oh yeah, he was telling the truth. Like I'm not an elite athlete, and look what I did."
Mhm.
And I also feel you in like in the era of social media, most people do the opposite of that. It would be in my interest when I rode across the Atlantic to be like hashtag built different. I'm a beast. You guys are useless. Look, and like and I did all the polls and on the Everest and all like yeah built different. And it's not true. I'm just a normal person who committed to doing it, and any normal person can commit to doing anything. And I want people to
Mhm.
do that through my events. So it's not
Mhm.
so they're not like sure they can be proud of it and show it off on their social media, but not to say that like I'm better than you because it's not true. We can all do it. We can all do it if we set our mind to it. So anyway, I've got these 4 events. One's going to be like an extreme cycle in Turkmenistan because I've got good contacts there. One's going to be an
Mhm.
ultra marathon in Mauritania that I told you it's going to get launched this. Actually, probably going to be launched next week. It's going to be December this year. I'm doing the coolest one of all is in Thailand.
Mhm.
It's called the Triathlon instead of the triathlon. It's going to be a
Nice.
cycle from the most northern point of Thailand, 1,000 kilometer cycle to Bangkok. and then
Hmm.
going to be a rowboat from Bangkok to one of the islands called Koh Samui. That's 1,000 kilometers, and then ultra marathon around Samui to finish. And then the fourth one, I'm in the process of deciding. It's going to be somewhere in the Arctic. It's going to be like a cold race.
Hmm. So people can come and join you if they want to do the some of the amazing
What
stuff
a
that you've done already.
suffer!
Exactly, communal suffering. That's the idea. Um,
Exactly.
so now we've given hustle culture one in the eye as well, which is always useful. Where can people find you, Johnny? If people haven't read your story or heard you already, where can people find you?
Like I'm not like huge on social media because I worry about the effects that it has. But of course, I'm on there with updates and whatever stuff that you can join me with. So on Insta and Twitter and Facebook, I'm at One Step Forward, and then my blog itself is onestepforward.com.
Mhm. Amazing. Well, Johnny, it's been an absolute privilege talking to you, mate. I could have asked so many more questions, and maybe we'll get to chat again in the future someday. But until then, all the best of luck with your communal suffering, I suppose.
Thank you, mate.
Lovely. Okay, so that is us, I think.